Hey, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at. Thank you all for joining. We'll give this just a minute as I hit broadcast. Everyone is just first filing into the attendee box. So thank you all for joining. I hope everyone is having a great Thursday and your week is wrapping up well. I'd like to thank you for joining our session today. Audit preparation without worry, drama, and overeating. As Yvonne pointed out, I don't know that we could ever say without any worry, but we'll definitely help try and minimize some of that worry throughout our conversation today. Which is a good point. I'll say this multiple times throughout because we'll have some attendees that will join off and on throughout the session. This really is meant to be a dialogue and a conversation. So in the bottom of your screen, most likely when you logged in, you'll see a little Q&A section. You can just type your questions there. You can always raise your hand electronically, obviously. You'll see it, and I can give you the mic and you can ask the question live too if that's your preference. So we really look forward to and enjoy the engagement of all our clients and relationships on these sessions. So please do not hesitate and start thinking about your questions now. Start rifling them in. I've got some that have already been sent in, so we'll start with some of those. But probably most pertinent to start with is real quick introduction on Archer and who we are for some of you that we have not spoke with in the past. So I'll give a 60-second overview on Archer, and then most importantly, we'll get some roundtable introductions of our panelists today as well. So again, thank you all for joining. Archer is a company that was formed 6 years ago by 4 partners who have spent their careers in cyber and physical security, and specifically in the compliance space for utilities. Archer has continued to grow, and we've continued to expand into multiple verticals, not just utilities, although that's kind of where we started, and that's our home, if you will. But we're in everything from oil and gas, mining, food processing, really specializing in that operational technology space for, again, multiple frameworks for compliance, physical, and cybersecurity. I'd say the one thing that we really focus on here at Archer is bringing in top talent. And so you'll see some of that from the folks that will introduce themselves here momentarily, as well as the partnerships that we form. And we've got one of our key business partners on with us today as well from IPKeys SigmaFlow. So we'll let Lewis, I'll let Lewis give you a little bit more background as we do introductions today. So by way of introductions, I'm Mark Bromstead. I'll be the facilitator through the conversation today. You'll see my email address on here if you want to jot that down as well. If you have any questions after the session, you can always email me and reach out to me directly, and I'll either answer your question or get one of these fine panelists to introduce yourself. So without any further ado, let me go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves. We'll go from top to bottom, left to right. So I've introduced myself. So Brent, I'll ask you to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Brent Castanetto, senior security consultant with Archer. I've been with Archer nearly 5 years. Really enjoy working with the good folks that we do in the utility space. I spent 6.5 years managing the WEC audit team, specifically on the SIP side, the cybersecurity side. Really enjoyed the time there, and look forward to providing some responses to some of the questions that we have today around audit preparation. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Brent. Mr. Parker.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So Steve Parker, managing partner with Archer. Obviously, I've been with Archer since the beginning. Was one of the 4 founding members of the organization. I've been in the electric industry almost 20 years now. I started when I was 5 years old. No, just kidding. I worked at a large utility for several years. Did a stint at WEC as one of the on the original NERC SIP audit team. And I remember very fondly a day in January of 2010 when I met Brent at the airport in El Paso, Texas, as he began his career. So we overlapped a little bit at WEC back there. I've done a lot of things in the industry, obviously consulting being a big part of it with Archer. I've done some work in the nonprofit space, training and education around SIP as well. So been doing it for a while, and hopefully some of that experience will come out here today.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Lewis, with your introduction, if you would also maybe give a high-level overview on IPKeys and SigmaFlow as well for our folks.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Absolutely. So my name is Lewis Riendeau. I manage the professional services team with the SigmaFlow product line with IPKeys Power Partners. If you're not familiar with us, SigmaFlow is a NERC compliance system that helps you manage workflow and aggregate evidence together into a single repository. In January of last year, SigmaFlow was acquired by the cybersecurity firm IPKeys. To give you a little bit of background about IPKeys, our mission is to strengthen the cybersecurity defense programs of utilities and public safety organizations. Our customers are made up of three main sectors: the federal government, specifically the Department of Defense, public safety, and energy. We have been in business since 2005. We're headquartered in New Jersey and have 5 regional offices around the country. In addition to NERC compliance, as part of IPKeys, our solution portfolio now includes cybersecurity services, networks, data center, hardware, demand management, and smart energy grids. So I wanted to say thank you to Archer for inviting us to participate in today's session. I'm looking forward to sharing some of the experiences that we've had implementing compliance systems and helping our customers get ready for audit.
Great, thanks, Lewis. Appreciate that. And Yvonne.
Good morning. I'm Yvonne McMacken, and I've been with Archer for a little over 2 years, and I specialize in the O&P sector. I do have some SIP knowledge, but I usually leave that to the experts out there with Archer. So I'm happy to answer any O&P questions today, and Brent and I will probably be kind of tag teaming each other between SIP and O&P on your questions for audit. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yvonne. And so again, for those that just joined, we had a bunch just pop in as well. We really look for this to be engaging in dialogue and conversations. So maybe a quick way to get some quick engagement at least is I'm going to launch a quick poll, and I'll ask everyone to just do a quick vote. How much time do you spend in preparing for an audit? So if you could just go ahead and click on a number. Very good. Wait just a couple more seconds, let a few more folks get a vote in. All right, went ahead and hit complete on that. So hopefully you can all see the results. I would say I would have guessed probably about that. You know, bravo to a couple of you that just spend a few hours. I'm guessing some of that definitely goes to size and complexity as well. So we'll get into some of that through our questions today. So on the bottom of your screen, you'll see again the area to ask questions and answer, or Q&A section. So go ahead and click all your questions in there. I'll go ahead and start with the ones that have already been shared with us, and we'll go from there. I'll kind of call on each of the panelists here, but everyone will probably jump in as well. Steve, this first one I'm going to throw your way. Pretty broad question. What should we do when we receive the notice of audit? And panic is not the right answer.
That's a great question. Polish your resume. I don't know. Well, first of all, I'll turn that maybe a little bit upside down. If you're not thinking about prepping for an audit until you get your notice of audit, you've already lost the game. It's very important that you begin your preparation really all along the way as part of your compliance program. To use a sports analogy, and for those of you who forgot what sports are, well, go Google it, right? It's kind of like opening day of the baseball season. The umpire yells play ball, and you're getting ready to receive the first pitch, and all your preparation should have been done, right? You've been through spring training and the preseason and all that. Audits are very much the same way. So when you receive your notice of audit, you should be able to take a deep breath, relax a little bit for a moment, and say, we've been planning for this, we've been preparing for this, and now it's game on. So really the focus is on execution at that point. You should have your planning in place. You should be ready, so to speak. Now you've got to execute. A few key things, this is where your communications are going to start, right? All hands on deck. You're like, it's game time, folks. So you go out, everybody who's going to be involved in the audit, communicate to them, let them know you've got the audit letter, confirm everything that you've been planning for, dates, all of that. You probably want to check your scope and the audit period in the letter to make sure it meets with your expectations. Hopefully you've been planning to show compliance with all of the requirements. Your audit scope is likely to be a subset of those requirements, and so that's where you're obviously going to put the most effort in. So, double down on the scope in the audit period that has been enumerated in your letter. And finally, look to see if there's any surprises. Was there something you weren't expecting, a requirement you weren't expecting to be in scope? Maybe a member of the audit team, or God forbid, maybe FERC is going to do your audit instead of your regional entity. Things of that nature. If there's something that wasn't expected, then you probably need to, kind of rally the troops and see how you're going to respond to that. But hopefully your preparation is well done. Hopefully receiving the letter is just kicking off the execution period that you are well prepared for.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Probably a follow-up. We'll probably have a lot of add-ons to that, but the next question, and Yvonne, I'll start with you on this one. And probably everyone will have something on this one. Obviously, RSOs are incredibly important to the audit. What are some easy steps to take as you prepare your RSOs?
Well, one thing that you can keep in mind is that it is a story. So tell your story of compliance. And I think it's good to take the approach that you may not have the same auditor looking at every requirement. So let's say in TOP1, you've got R10 and R13. You want to think that there could be two different auditors, and one's going to look at R10, one will look at R13. So I recommend doing like your intro about your entity into each of the narratives. It seems a little redundant, but if you keep in mind that there's going to be different sets of eyes on the narrative, then it's a good approach to take. And I think it's just really good to put what you do into the narrative as far as you follow procedures or whatever it is to show that you do compliance and you do it well. Really tell that story.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. Brent, let's go your way.
Yeah, I'll echo what Yvonne says. I mean, it's your opportunity to communicate your story to the auditor, your compliance story for a specific standard or requirement. In addition to that, telling that story appropriately between the various business units or the groups that work in your organization, I think accurate and relevant citation of evidence is critically key and important, especially when we're working with the NERC evidence request tool. Appropriately citing and referencing accurate documentation to corroborate the story that you've told in your RSOD directs the auditor's eyes where you want them and need them to go to again verify while they're verifying that story.
Very good. Lewis, anything else there you want to add before I move on?
Yeah, so a lot of what our focus is really about, helping our customers organize their evidence. So what we see as being helpful is having, starting off with a clear inventory of all the standards and requirements that that you have to comply with. And then along with that, just one centralized place to store all this information. So who's responsible for each one? What information do they need to provide? When do they need to provide it so you can stay up to date? And then having that be entirely searchable, so that if you have a lot of our focus is around how to organize that and package that evidence when you need it. So one simple thing is even moving away from folder structures where you can tag all of different requirements, date ranges that are applicable to artifacts and evidence, so that you can quickly retrieve that when you need it for audit.
Great, thank you, Lewis. The next question, Brent, you kind of mentioned it already, so I'm going to start with you on this question. We have never used the NERC evidence tool. How should we be preparing for our next audit with it? Any tips or tricks?
Yeah, so the NERC evidence request tool is, essentially a linked spreadsheet to that allows the auditors to have a single place or single pane of glass to review your evidence inventory, to then submit additional follow-up data requests. And it has become quite challenging for some entities or utilities to know how to respond appropriately, from the scoping area to all the way down to the sample sets. I think that the number one thing that folks can do to ensure they're using this tool correctly is to, like Lewis said, is to ensure that your inventory, not only your inventory of evidence, but your inventory of cyber assets, embedded cyber assets, embedded cyber systems, is accurate when you start. Otherwise, the data, you're going to have to go back to the region or FERC or NERC or whomever's performing the audit and say, hey, just a sec, we got to come back with a second set. Our inventory was not accurate. So, to that end, ensure that your systems and tools that you're using to maintain these databases of data sets of inventory is accurate, and then can port over easily to the NERC evidence request tool, and then have some QA, some type of process that forces and requires your folks to true up and ensure that what you're sending them is truly what you want to send them and is accurate and appropriate.
Great, thank you, Brent. Any other feedback from anyone?
Just to add on to that, I think that's really what we've seen is these inventories. They seem so simple, but they can be really powerful. We've seen customers that may have each business area may have their own list of cyber assets, and people have added columns to them. And so really the question of data quality and consistency is something that we see as being really important, so that you have one version of the one version of the truth across all of these across all of the requirements.
Thank you, Lewis.
One other thought, Mark, just before we jump off of this one, just hit me. It's kind of that concept of practice like you play. I think if the first time you're looking at the evidence request tool is when they send that notice of audit to you, again, as Steve mentioned, you've already lost the game in that sense. So this should be something, and NERC continues to update and enhance or make modifications to the ERT on a pretty continuous basis. So if your compliance team isn't out there working off of and through and with the current evidence request tool, you're going to struggle when that audit notice comes. So practice it, incorporate some of those elements from a reporting perspective from the tools that you use, so that it's not an overly burdensome and super onerous process to make it work.
Thank you, Brent. And Brent, if I remember right, they just, to your point about updates, they just made an update this month on that tool, if I remember correctly as well.
That's correct.
Version 4.5, I think they're on?
Yep, 4.5.
All right. So if the last time you all looked at it was a month or two ago, it's already outdated.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thanks, Brent. Steve, this next question that came in, I will throw your way. You had talked about in your introduction some of the training conversations. So I have several folks that have never been through an audit interview. Where should I spend my time coaching them? So Steve, I'll start with you.
Fun. First audit interview. Practice, right? So practice is key to an interview. In terms of coaching, the first thing is, relax, and let them know, relax. It's an audit interview. It's not a legal deposition. You're not going on trial on a court case. You're simply going to be asked to explain your knowledge and maybe present some evidence or explain some of the processes that are going on. So it's not something that anyone should be particularly nervous about, but preparation is definitely important. Being comfortable with the knowledge, so ensuring that your interviewees know what they're talking about, right? So they should know the processes they're going to be speaking to. They should be familiar with the evidence and they should be able to speak to that relatively freely off the cuff. They may need to refer back to documentation on some key detail or something of that nature. And then practice. So from a coaching perspective, run them through the questions that you expect to get. You know, tell me about your program. Tell me about the plan. Explain to me what this piece of evidence means. And I like to throw curveballs in practice. You know, if you train hard, you fight easy, as they say. So throw folks some curveballs. Maybe get a little belligerent with them, or maybe give them the silent treatment, or maybe ask them to re-clarify something that seems blatantly obvious, just to give them experience on all sorts of scenarios that may pop up during an audit. So, you know, stay calm, don't worry, practice and prepare, and there should be no reason to be concerned during the real audit.
Great, thanks, Steve. And Brent, being an ex-auditor yourself, anything you would add on to that?
Yeah, Steve said it very, very clearly and well. I think the one thing I would add is, as a compliance department or organization, that practice or preparation from a witness preparation perspective allows you the opportunity to ensure that you have the right people in that seat when the auditors come by for their questions. So I think that practice piece also affords you the opportunity to say that maybe we ought to adjust course and put someone else in that seat. They're not the right SME or subject matter expert. Or maybe we can do some coaching to help guide and mentor so that in the real audit engagement, things are much, much smoother.
Very good. Thank you, Brent. We've had a couple of questions come in that are referencing some of the prior conversations we had. So before we're going ahead, I want to go back and cover a couple of these. This one, Brent, I'll kind of cue towards you since it's on the data collection tool. We found that our auditors did not plan to use the RSAWs and the evidence narratives we had carefully prepared. They had their own versions of the data collection tool on a spreadsheet asking for specific evidence and narratives, and felt that this was all they needed in the format they wanted. We considered this duplicative, and it required a lot of manual effort to reconfigure our responses. What are you seeing, and what is the trend?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. There is a region out there that has moved away or moved off of the RSAW, and that's a challenge when you're talking about audit consistency. So an audit that's happening on the East Coast may look very different than one that's happening in the Midwest or out West. And that's a very unfortunate thing. However, that preparation piece, whether you're having to fill out the RSAW in the spreadsheet with that narrative in the spreadsheet natively, or you're doing it in an RSAW that's in a Word document, the value is still, I think, the same, right? The value is still there because it is your opportunity to explain your story and demonstrate how you comply with a specific standard. So again, I don't speak for the commission, right? I can't speak for NERC, but I can say that the opportunity that the RSAW and whatever tool that your region uses is your opportunity to share your story and demonstrate how you comply.
And one thing I'll add to that, what we've seen with our customers is that the value of having all of this information, from the narrative to the documents, to the inventories of devices, centralized in a database, is really allows them to be more flexible when responding to those types of requests. So if they request for something in a slightly different format, then all you do is adjust how you're querying that database or create a new report rather than manually rework all of those spreadsheets or documents.
Excellent point.
And Mark, I'll jump in to just another comment on this. I think there's an element of truth to the RSAWs being duplicative, which is why I think at least one region is starting to move away from them. The evidence request tool really lays out the evidence that the auditors need for the audit. So having evidence also in the RSAW, I think, is a bit duplicative. But the narrative pieces, as Brent was talking about, the narratives are very important, I think, because that's where you're explaining to the auditors, giving them the high-level overview of how you comply and explaining some of the evidence. So whether that narrative is in the RSAW or in a standalone document, I think there's value there. I've heard the same thing with some regional variations. I have seen lately, there seems to be a trend to focus on the ERT, the evidence request tool, that spreadsheet. I know NERC is pushing that. So I think that's going to be fairly consistent from an evidence request perspective. The RSAWs may end up going away or being de-emphasized, but at least preserve the narrative. I think that has a lot of value.
Very good. Another follow-up similar to this, Yvonne, I'll throw this one your way. Is the ERT only for SIP or O&P as well?
Well, the O&P, so I've been referring to it as the request for information. And on the O&P side, I have seen requests for PRC 5, FAC 8, and FAC 14. So, and it's pretty straightforward. They're asking for very specific things, like with FAC 3, they want your TVMP. They just really want to see that you're doing an annual work plan and what goes into that. So I found with the last audit I participated in that we actually didn't have to add a lot of evidence for FAC 3 because of what was submitted prior.
Very good. Excellent. So for any of these questions that we're answering as well, if there's any follow-up, feel free to send those in or give us a thumbs up that we answered your question complete as well on each of these. So let's see. Let's go to this next one. Louis, you kind of talked about this already, so maybe a little repetitive, but I still want to ask it. How can automation help with your preparation? Do you think every client needs to automate?
Yeah, I think every client does need to automate. It just may vary on to what degree. What we were talking about before about having just one single source of truth, one evidence repository, is we found to be really valuable and helpful for our customers. And then the automation can also be really ease the burden in collecting that evidence. So automation can help you aggregate data together in one place instead of having to manually go to various systems to collect it. By having all of that information in one place, it's easier to compare, to look for exceptions, to see what is if something is what's authorized versus what we're actually observing in an environment. And it just really helps you with visibility. So that, like we were talking earlier about the reporting, it allows you to retrieve the data in any way that you want, whether that's by cyber asset or a piece of equipment or standard. And so it keeps that visibility. It allows you to be searchable. It eases it can help you reduce the burden to manually collect all that information.
Great, thank you, Louis. Anyone have anything to add on that one? Nope. You were very thorough and complete. Thanks, Louis. Brent, I'm going to throw this next one your way. Being an ex-auditor, I'm sure others will have some conversation on it. What do you think audit preparation looks like during post-pandemic? So how does it vary?
Yeah, it's significantly different. We're used to in the past hosting an army of auditors from the various regions and NERC, and if you live in a nice temperate or warm climate area, and it's the winter time, they're going to bring in a full slate of people. That's not happening anymore, at least right now. And so it's challenging to not only not engage face-to-face with the audit corps, but now we're having to demonstrate our compliance over a WebEx or Zoom or over phone conversations. And that can be very, very difficult. And so it's difficult to describe and demonstrate the culture of compliance in your organization via phone. It's difficult to talk about the big picture, right? Your internal compliance, your internal controls that you've developed or implemented over time. And that human element is somewhat lost in what we've seen in supporting audits, midstream during this pandemic. So significant changes. I think the best thing that entities can do is, and we've harped on this already, is that RSA narrative becomes so critically important, because that is your opportunity to explain yourself and demonstrate how you comply. Additionally, citation and reference to appropriate documentation, because that's all the auditor is going to see, in conjunction with Zoom and or WebEx or whatever conference calls that you're having or facilitating with them. It's very, very difficult to cover all these elements with them, where in the past we could rely on at least a week or two where they were on site visiting with us, and we had an opportunity to demonstrate some of these big picture culture compliance issues.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Brent. Any other feedback, or you guys think Brent got it?
One thing I'll add that we're seeing from our customers during this time is actually the additional requests to automate some things that may have been a manual signature before, or a manual thing that they've done in person. So that's also just a trend that we've been seeing that's been coming up with our customers.
Very, very good. Thank you. Next one, Steve, I'm going to throw your way. Some of you have been doing audits for several years. What are some of the important changes I should be thinking about if I have not been through one in a while?
Well, I'd start by saying this is not your father's audit, to kind of use a phrase. One trend that I've definitely been hearing from people within the industry and with some of our clients is there's been I think a surprise, a shock, and a rude awakening, so to speak, with the intensity of the audits. So I think that the audit team, the ERO, regions as a whole generally are looking deeper. I think they're being more thorough. Obviously, some of the audit approaches have changed. I think the expectations are definitely increasing. So what you might have gotten away with a few years back, you might not get away with this time. If you have not yet had a version 5, version 6 audit, obviously that's a huge change. If you had one of the early version 5, version 6 audits, a little bit lighter weight back then. So it's definitely becoming more intense. The evidence request tool, I think, is part of that, getting a little bit more consistency. It's a very thorough request for evidence, and so that gives the auditors more to work with, I believe. One other thing that, FERC being involved in audits, I think has upped the game a little bit. They're doing a handful of audits a year. They put out some lessons learned that you can go and look at, and looking at what their lessons learned are from the audits, it's clear that their expectations are focused on what you should be doing for security and not just the letter of the law for compliance, the spirit of the law as well. And so there are expectations that perhaps you might not get a violation if you're not hitting them, but it could raise concerns. So all in all, I think everyone should be maturing. Expectations are that everyone is maturing and growing and improving their programs, both for the underlying compliance requirements as well as the overall security concerns and expectations. And I'll also point out that we've seen penalties increasing. And I think that's reflective of the fact that expectations are increasing. We're now more than a decade into this. So the expectations are is organizations have figured this out. They have mature programs in place. They're monitoring the standards. They're continuing to improve and grow and expand their programs. And if not, you get left behind, and you're probably going to feel some pain during an audit. So be prepared. It's not what it used to be. It's probably going to be a little bit harder than you might have expected.
Great, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Any other feedback, Yvonne? Maybe from an O&P perspective.
I think that was a great explanation, and I've been hearing the same thing that Steve just mentioned about auditors going a bit deeper. They're working from home. They probably have a little more time on their hands. And I think maybe one thing that hasn't been said yet is when we're interacting via video, like for the SME, them during their interviews, they might get nervous, and just to remember to not over speak to what's being asked of them. It's easy to give too much detail, and sometimes that can backfire. So just really focus on what's the question, answer it, and be okay with the silence that might follow. So that was kind of the only other little nugget I could think of to add to that.
Very good. Brent or Lewis, anything else to add? Otherwise, I'll go on. All right. Well, let's do another poll quick. Just make sure everyone's still with us here. What key activities do you spend your time on preparing for an audit? So do some of you focus on one area over the other? Or, really all of them do you hit as you're prepping? Give another couple seconds. And there you are. So it looks like most of you are really touching all these areas. Let me hit share results. You guys can't see it. There we go. Now you can see them. Most of you are touching each of these areas. Some of you really hone in on the evidence collecting and organizing, and others writing the RSAWs. All just a reflection of where you're at in your organization. So thank you for that. Got a couple more questions in, so we're kind of coming up here on time as well. So if you guys have any more last minute questions you want to type in, please feel free to go to the Q&A section and type those in. Otherwise, we'll kind of round out here with our last several questions. So a couple of these we might have already touched on, but I'll ask them just so that everyone's questions is asked. Brent, this one: how do I make sure my evidence is as impactful as possible? Mute button.
Yeah, that'll get you. Sorry about that. Yeah, I've noted it a few times, and I'll reiterate here. It's accurate citations. Oftentimes you'll as an SME, you're just trying to get your job done every single day, right? And so someone is asking for a baseline report, for example, and you send over an entire baseline report. Well, the relevant pieces of information are somewhere hidden in 1,000 pages of documentation, right? So you can't just hand that over to the auditors and say, here you go, good luck, and find it, because they're going to send it back to you and say, please, give us something else, basically. This isn't working. So accurate citations to page number, paragraph number. If you want to use highlighters or flags or something to draw the eye of the auditors to explain what you're trying to demonstrate from an appropriate evidence perspective. I think that's crucial to make sure your evidence actually hits the mark each and every time. And having that, I've mentioned already, but a QA process, an evaluation process, so that you're not sending stuff that's over speaking to your evidence, or not speaking at all to your evidence. Making sure there's a QA, some type of a checkpoint to ensure that that relevant information is getting into the hands of those that need it.
Excellent. Thank you, Brent. Any follow-up from anyone? Otherwise, I've got go ahead, Lewis.
Yeah, just to add to that, that I think this is another area where automation can help. That when you're presenting that evidence, that if you're collecting all of this in a system, in a systematic way, in a controlled way, then any of the evidence that you're presenting, you can back up and go into more detail if necessary. So that date is part of a structured process. We can and you can show additional background on who exactly did what and other artifacts that were collected.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lewis. And I think by you answering that question, you kind of bridged the next question as well. So I'll ask it, and if there's anything that you want to add, feel free. But how do you make sure your evidence is well organized and easily retrievable? And you kind of talk through that. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there.
Yeah, sure. So I've touched on some of these points, but I keep coming back to these inventories, just knowing what are the standards that we need to comply with. then having a consolidated inventory of evidence tagged to those standards. Again, avoiding file structures so that if you want to tag one file to multiple standards or multiple records, you can do that. I think the other attributes of your evidence are things that are helpful to track. So for example, applicability. You may want evidence on hand that's easily searchable, that some of the other panelists were just mentioning, you may not want to initially present that if you weren't directly asked for it, but having it organized in that way makes it easy for you to search and back up any additional evidence or respond to additional requests. So I think that's really having the dates collected, tied to an inventory, tagged to the standards. I think are really the keys to keeping it organized.
Wonderful. Thank you, Louis. I've got a couple more questions here, and I'm going to roundtable each of them. So we'll kind of do these a little bit more rapid fire and get everyone's input on these. Steve, we'll start with you on this one and just go right around in order. What is one thing you can think of that you should never do during an audit?
Wow, tough to narrow down to just one, Mark. There's so many things that could go wrong that you should not do. I would say I guess the biggest thing that I would say, and this goes for everybody involved, is don't get emotional, right? We joked about there's no crying during an audit, but you also shouldn't get angry or upset or frustrated. If you get emotional, something bad's going to happen, right? You're going to misspeak, you're going to take action you don't want, you're going to that's going to bleed off onto the auditors. And then if they get emotional, you don't know where that can get. So stay calm, relax, understand this is a process, and there's nothing that's going to happen during an audit that you can't address afterwards, calmly and professionally through established processes.
Very good. Thanks, Steve. Brent, how about from you?
Sorry, having trouble with the mute button again. Steve mentioned the emotion, right? These are highly charged type of engagements, and so that's a very difficult theme. Train your people to ensure that doesn't get out of hand, and they can keep those emotions in check. The other piece I think that I've seen folks do before is during the site visits and walk downs, the auditors are taking notes on your documentation. I've heard stories about folks or entities that are also then noting those challenges that they saw and identifying potential risk areas, and then scanning that information and supplying it back to the auditors. That would be another one of those QA pieces to make sure that the evidence you're sending them, regardless of context or where they're coming from, has been checked and validated, and you're sending what's appropriate.
Very good. Thank you. Louis?
I would go back to what I was talking about before, where not presenting more information than you really asked for, and I think that ties into what I've been discussing about having everything very searchable and organized, so you can respond with precisely what you're asked and not open up more surface area.
Very good. And Yvonne?
I was just thinking about data requests. I know I participated in one audit where we ended up thinking we'd have around 50 data requests, and we ended up with 51. So it was quite a bit to track. I ended up being the point person for that, and just really having access to the SMEs, and some of the requests had a very short turnaround time. So I actually called them, some of the SMEs, and said, hey, you got to get this back to me in 60 minutes. So I think it's just, an Excel spreadsheet or maybe a whiteboard that you can print off if you need to take notes, but just really be organized with your data requests, and probably have one point person if possible to handle them.
Thank you, Yvonne. Last one, and we'll just go in the same order. So Steve, I'll start with you for this last one. What is the one or two things that we should do to prepare for an audit that might be small but can be very impactful?
Well, I think I want to key off something that Yvonne just said. You mentioned data requests, short turnaround times. If you're a compliance person, if you're working in the compliance team and you need something back from an SME within an hour, it's going to be much easier to get that if you have an established relationship with them. So I'm going to say building relationships internally amongst those that will be involved in the audit, so they know each other, hopefully respect each other, hopefully like each other, so that when you do get down into the thick of the battle and you need a favor, you need to encourage someone to really step up. It's not just some nameless, faceless corporate type that's giving them an order, but it's someone that they know and respect that's part of their team, and so they can come together and and help out the team and get things done.
Thank you, Steve. Appreciate it. Brent, how about from you?
Yeah, again, health and wellness is kind of top of mind right now. And these audit engagements, I've had some late nights, whether I was on the audit side or supporting an entity side. Take care of your folks, take care of your people. If you have a budget to feed them if they're staying at, late in the evenings or getting there early in the mornings, these nice treats, if you will, right, that we don't typically get on a day in and day out basis. It's a very small and simple thing, but it goes a long way for your SMEs and your compliance folks, and lots of caffeine. That's a big deal. You're muted, Mark.
I did it. Thank you. That contributes to the title of the overeating aspect we threw in here. So, but thank you, Brent. Lewis, and then Yvonne.
I don't have too much more to add to this point. I think I just keep coming back to being able to present in the format, in the way that the auditor is asking for, with that searchability and quality and consistency.
Perfect. Thank you, Lewis. And Yvonne, any last minute small item that you would like to impart your wisdom on?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that, and maybe I'll just throw kind of a personal twist to this. Very social, and I was participating in an audit about 8 years ago, or it was about 4 years ago, and I was asked to go on a group mountain bike ride. And I knew the offsite audit was starting that Monday morning, and I was like, I probably shouldn't go. And they talked me into it, and I literally broke my ankle. And it was a pretty horrific experience. And I was so involved with this particular audit that I begged my surgeon to do surgery and release me immediately. So I was back to work within 12 hours after my surgery, part-time, obviously. I couldn't be there all day because of just swelling and different issues from surgery. But know that it's okay to say no to your friends, family, whatever, prior to your audit engagement. That time, if it's 2 weeks, just dedicate the 2 weeks, and say no to the fun, and have a ton of fun after your audit is done. That'd be my best advice on that.
And I'm guessing you have an audit coming up, and you hung the bike on the wall so you wouldn't do any more.
Yes,
right?
I can. It's secured in a way that I can't get to it easily. So that's a good thing right now, because I am involved with an audit. So
very good. Excellent. So, with that said, we've covered a lot of ground today. I'll open it up kind of last minute. If there's any last minute item any of you want to impart wisdom on. We've kind of did a couple roundtables here, but I don't want to end without at least giving an open mic to everybody. Any last minute items? All right, then what I'm going to do is end with one last poll and really look for some feedback from you all. You have my email address on the screen at the moment. Feel free to write that down and send me any questions or conversations you'd like to have with us. We'd be happy to engage with you offline. Really want to thank our panelists today. A special thanks to Lewis for joining from IPKeys, and from all of our attendees that joined as well. Here's the last poll for you. So go ahead and I won't be displaying the results on this one, but go ahead and just give us a kind of a thumbs up, or if you want to talk with us further offline, you can click that too, and we can follow up with you individually. So thank you all for your time. Have a great day and a great rest of the week, and hopefully a beautiful weekend. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.